Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, greetings, my friends, and thank you so much for tuning in to today's program here, the Todd Huff Show, the Toddcast, in fact. I'm happy to have you no matter where you're listening, whether you're listening on radio, you're listening on to our audio podcast. It is a pleasure to be here today. I want to talk today about some of the developments regarding the way that ICE operations are going to be handled in Minnesota. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the latest in the temporary government shutdown, which that's been fixed, but we've got another clock that's ticking away because the DHS funding, which includes immigrations and customs enforcement, border patrol, those sorts of things, those were only funded for 2 weeks, my friends. And so there's another imminent potential government shutdown looming out there, partial, I should say, shutdown. And I want to talk about this. I want to talk about the demands that the Democrats have made in order to fund the Department of Homeland Security. And I want to talk about what is happening, first and foremost, in Minnesota, which will bridge nicely with that, my friends. That's where we're headed today. I thank you so much for joining us. Maybe you've reached that stage where managing your money feels more like juggling than it feels like just dealing with numbers. You have things like tax planning to deal with, estate work, investment choices, a whole lot more, my friends. That's when family office services can really make a difference. Full Suite Wealth brings all those pieces together into one cohesive strategy. Their family office services gives you access to a coordinated team with advanced options, strategies, private equity, private credit, legal expertise, all those things, my friends, come together under one roof. It's about simplifying your financial life, planning for your future, making sure your legacy, my friends, stays strong for generations. That takes planning, that takes foresight, that takes a team of people that have been there before. If you're ready for that next level of support, head on over to fullsuitewealth.com. That's fullsuitewealth.com. They'll help you build your legacy and secure your future. Okay, so when this first was announced recently, I don't know, maybe last week probably, that there would be a drawdown of ICE agents in Minnesota, I haven't actually commented on this because I really wasn't sure what I thought about this. Of course, on the one level, the superficial, just on the surface level, it could certainly appear like the administration capitulated, that they had given in, and that was the narrative that some people ran with. My instincts told me that I didn't think that was the case. I don't see this in Trump. I don't see an unwillingness to continue to do the right thing, enforce the law, especially when he's made promises and made this such a big deal, right? I mean, you can trace this back to build that wall back in 2016 when he was campaigning the first time. So this is all an extension of that to clean up what's been happening to our country. The border is now secured, and now you're left with the next step of what do we do with the people who are here illegally? Well, the law makes it clear what we're supposed to do, and that's exactly what's happening. And so when I saw that there was a drawback or planned drawback of ICE, and I saw a lot of people, right? They jumped on the bandwagon that said, Trump let us down. That was a possibility in my head, but I didn't think that was where this was going to end. And I don't. For those of you For those of you who've maybe wondered what I've thought about this, I don't think that this is Trump capitulating. I think that this is actually a very good sign. I don't think that this is some victory for Jacob Frey and the lawlessness happening in Minnesota, Tim Walz, Keith Ellison. It's not a victory for them politically. And so the news is that ICE is going to be pulling 700 agents. I think there's about 3,000 total. They're going to pull 700. Did I say 1,000? 700. Sorry, misspoke there. That's what misspeaking is. When you hear a politician tear into someone and say something completely inappropriate and they said, I misspoke, that's not misspeaking. Misspeaking is what I just did when I said 7,000 when I meant 700 because I was thinking about the 3,000 that they actually had there. That's misspeaking. So there's roughly 3,000 ICE agents there. 700 of them are going to be pulled from Minneapolis. Of course, the narratives were Trump capitulated, we've defeated ICE, the ICE outworked, and all that sort of stuff. So retreat, weakness, collapse, giving up, throwing in the towel. That was the narrative, even amongst many or some conservatives. And I'll be candid, that's still a potential. I give that a couple percent. There's always, I try to think in terms of percentages. In fact, today is the last day, the trade deadline for the NBA draft. And I've got a daughter, all my kids kind of enjoy it, but one daughter in particular, she loves this stuff. So I've been following this and we've been talking about it from time to time. So there's a statistical chance of a lot of things happening. There's not really a 0% chance of too many. There's some things that there's no chance of happening. But nonetheless, I try to think in terms of odds here. And I just don't think that there's practically a 0% chance that this is Trump capitulating, but it's, probably a couple of percent. So what happened? Well, Tom Homan was recently picked by Trump again to go to Minnesota and to fix the problem, right? We've had 2 deaths in Minnesota. And so Trump obviously, listen, let me state the obvious here. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants anyone to be killed in a protest, a riot, whatever. Nobody wants that. Even the side that's on the side of law and order does not want to get to that point. I mean, using deadly force is the absolute last thing. This is not something, if someone celebrates this, I think there's something wrong. I understand was saying that, listen, they put an officer, an agent in a bad predicament and they have to make quick decisions. And, the officer felt threatened by a vehicle. The officer felt threatened about the presence of a gun. They saw, one of the suspects who was, they thought may have been reaching for the gun, but it had already been secured or taken out of his waistband or whatever. You can see as a rational human being how things happen, especially when you're already in a highly emotional situation. It's already gotten physical. You're physically restraining someone, or you physically have been hit by the front end of a car, whatever the circumstances. One can see, obviously, how this could escalate and a deadly force be used. Even if in hindsight we say that wasn't the right thing because, the gun wasn't there or whatever. But that doesn't mean that it's still not justified because, these things don't exist in some sort of a laboratory. They don't exist in a vacuum. There's all sorts of factors that are happening. And you have to be fair and reasonable and put yourself in those agents' shoes before you say what's reasonable or not. You just can't say that doesn't sound right. They should never shoot a person. Well, it'd be great if they never shot a person, of course. But if we can't think of a reason or a way that could happen, that's not being fair-minded either. So Tom Homan was sent up there to basically to try to end any violence that's been happening. And so he meets with Jacob Fry. He meets with Tim Walz. I don't know if Keith Ellison. He meets with all the people or the people that are obstructing. Now, let's take a half a step back. Let's take a half a step back here. The people that are protesting in the streets of Minnesota, rioting or obstructing law enforcement, there's different groups of people, right? There are people who are simply expressing their disapproval of immigration law and ICE enforcing it and all that sort of stuff. That's fine. They can absolutely do that. They can protest. They can say whatever they want to say. They can make their point. They can lobby their representatives to try to do everything they can within the law to get the law into such a outcome or shape that they desire the law to be that. They can certainly do that, and they've done that. But once you start, of course, rioting, damaging property, taking people inside of a church hostage, not letting them get to their children, storming private property. I've seen people that set up these kind of blockades in the middle of public streets, all sorts of things like this. Ironically, one of those groups who had set up, it wasn't a full blockade, but it was kind of a blockade in an intersection. They were monitoring people coming in and out of their neighborhood so that they could, identify if you were supposed to be there or not. They just did this in the middle of the street. The police came in and cleaned it up. But the ironic thing was they were basically saying, we want to make sure that you're supposed to be here. Well, isn't that the whole purpose of ICE? Isn't ICE saying we're making sure that you're supposed to be here to begin with? Isn't that just a larger operation of that? Anyway, so you have people at different places. You have some people who just buy the narrative. They're appalled by this. They go to social media. They fan the fumes. And sometimes they don't know it. Sometimes they do know it. Sometimes they're basing their information on half-truths or parts of the story. I've shared one of those the other day, the little 5-year-old boy who was quote-unquote detained by ICE. Makes it sound like ICE is just looking for little kids to put into handcuffs, when in reality what happened was they tried to detain the father who was here illegally. The father fled. He left his son, left the little boy. ICE was there. What were they supposed to do? Leave the boy? No, they took the boy until they could reconnect him with his father, who I believe was in fact here illegally. So that's a lot different story, right? Than just going out there like one U.S. senator, Democrat, went on the television and saying ICE is tear gassing schools, as though that's just what they're doing. This is beyond ridiculous. But there are people who believe this. And they believe this because Trump has been so demonized over the past decade. They can't see straight. They have been taught to hate Trump. They have been told that he's Hitler. They have been convinced that these are his methods. And nothing, of course, could be further from the truth. Enforcing the law and enforcing it to its full extent is what Trump is doing. But to suggest he's tear gassing schools and arresting little kids on the street, just insane stuff. And by the way, if there is evidence of any of that, real evidence with the full story, then we would love to hear it, because nobody's in favor of that. And this is so ridiculous and preposterous that we're even to this point. But you've got people who, of course, who fall for that stuff, who take to Facebook and become Facebook warriors, and they get involved in Facebook face-offs. And then you got some who organize the protests, which that's okay. But your protest can't be just a protest if you're impeding law enforcement, which is what happens. Now you've become people who are breaking the law. So now if you resist arrest, now you've got a whole series of things that you have to deal with. If you're physically obstructing officers and you get into a physical altercation with them, you can see how this can go haywire really quickly. And so this is what's been going on. And there's so much misinformation and deception, and people don't want to hear it. If it doesn't end with Trump is a Nazi, Trump is a fascist, Trump is stealing our friends and citizens and neighbors off our street, just basically making them vanish and that sort of nonsense, they don't want to hear it. They can't They can't entertain a thought that conflicts with their rabid ideology. And it's just really unfortunate. And so that's what's happened, of course, in Minnesota. So Minnesota has also been provided sanctuary for illegal aliens. They provided all sorts of obstacles to prevent their law enforcement from cooperating with law enforcement, federal law enforcement, ICE, and those sorts of individuals. And they've made this difficult. They have actually played a role in this. And so one of the main things that would happen is when they were, let's say they're releasing someone that they have in their custody. The local law enforcement has someone in their custody that ICE is looking for. Instead of handing that person over, they're releasing them. They're not dealing with ICE whatsoever. And so what happens? Now you put that person out on the street. Now those are the people, right? Now you've got not just the protesters, the agitators, the people who are directly trying to impede the law from being enforced. Now they get in their cars, they get their whistles. They are basically, whether they know it or not, I don't even fully know, but they end up protecting the people who were just released from jail in many cases, many instances, blowing whistles, blocking ICE. And so now you've got, instead of needing one or two law enforcement agents to simply grab a person who's handed over to them by the local authorities, now you've got to put together a team of 8 or 10 or whatever to go out in the streets to keep the peace among those people who are agitators and rebel rousers, who you're trying to get the person that you could have just picked up in many cases, not every case, but at least in some of these cases, they could have handed this person over to you, but they didn't, because they want a virtue signal. They want to say that we're not going to cooperate with ICE. And so look at then what happens. Now you've got a recipe for all this stuff. And I saw an exchange between Jessica, was it Tarlov on Fox News, and what's his name? Yeah, Greg Gutfeld. And he let her have it. He said, you guys are the ones who created this mess where people are getting killed. And you can see how they are, right? They've stirred it up. They've given false information. They've demonized Trump. They've demonized ICE. They've lied about what's happening. On top of that, they have a sanctuary city, sanctuary state that's not going to cooperate. You get all these people, all these emotions high up, just up off the charts. You drop people out into the public, and then you've created that. Leftist, you've done this. Congratulations. You created an environment where it is out of control. And so Homan, when he went and spoke with Fry and Walls and all these other lunatics, the people that have been causing this stuff, they came to an agreement. And this agreement is the precursor for the withdrawal of ICE. And so Homan comes to the podium recently and says, look, they've agreed to no longer, they've agreed to cooperate with us. No longer are they going to do it the way that I just described it. They're now going to do it in a way where they hand over the suspect to ICE, which Homan says takes much fewer ICE agents. And so now we don't need all of those agents. We don't need all of these additional agents, because now, instead of having 8 to 10 people that are out in public trying to find these people, we're now going to have 1 or 2 officers meet with and cooperate local law enforcement, which should have been happening the whole time. You see, they use terms, my friends. They use terms that are designed to deceive and mislead. And so they use terms like sanctuary city and sanctuary state. And it sounds like, this thing, you think of churches, you think of a nature sanctuary. It just seems so harmonious and peaceful, and you're doing the right thing. But what did it mean? It meant that scenario that I just laid out. It meant that they were going to do things in such a way that creates chaos, that increases the likelihood that people are going to be injured or, God forbid, shot, or that violence was going to happen on their streets. They've created this mess. And if they follow through, and I hope they do, if Walz and Fry follow through, which Homan's already said, listen, I wasn't born last night. Might have been born at night, wasn't born last night. We're going to see how this plays out. But this is what they've said they're going to do. And if they do this, it's going to make the job of ICE, of Border Patrol, much easier. We won't need nearly as many people to do the job, and it's going to be a much less violent and highly emotionalized or volatile situation. That's what is supposed to happen. So, got to take a timeout. Got more to say about that. I'm going to probably play a little bit of the clip of Homan saying that. And I want to move into the next phase of this conversation, which is the impending partial government shutdown again over fights to fund DHS, which includes ICE and Border Patrol and things like that, which I'll talk about in the next segment. My friends, there's a lot of confusion out there about Kratom. You've probably heard the headlines, and most of those headlines are based on synthetic junk that isn't real Kratom at all. That's pushed, by the way, by some shady sellers in the marketplace. Real Kratom is natural, it's tested, it's handled with care, and that's what you get from Christopher's Organic Botanicals. They're a family-run company. They partner directly with farmers in Indonesia who source the product. Every batch is lab tested for purity. There are no chemicals. There are no fillers. There are no shortcuts. This is a trusted herbal option, my friends. It's been used for generations, and it is a real alternative for people looking for something that doesn't come with a warning label as long as a CVS receipt. You can start with their Kratom Starter Pack. Use coupon code Todd Huff. You'll save 10% off your first order. Head on over to Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency, and yes, my friends, a timeout for me. When we get back, we're going to pick up where we left off. I'm going to play a short clip from Tom Homan. We're going to talk about the demands that the Democrat Party has placed on reopening, on funding DHS to avoid another partial government shutdown. We'll touch that, get to that after the timeout here, my friends. Sit tight. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. I first want to play, I told you there's a soundbite that I've got here from Tom Homan. This is, when was this? Earlier this week, talking about pretty much what we just talked about in the last segment. It's about a minute and a half, and he's explaining how the changes, the agreed upon changes, which we talked about last segment, where state and local officials in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, were no longer going to be difficult. We're no longer going to create circumstances that required more ICE agents to be on the streets. In fact, these circumstances, according to Homan, which I'm going to play this soundbite, and you can hear exactly what he says, but it sounds like it's going to take 75, 80% fewer agents to do the job that they were doing now, which they didn't cut the force by 75 or 80%. So now there's going to be people who are freed up to do even more of this. And by the way, before you little leftists get too excited here, cheering that ICE is taking 700 agents out of Minnesota, you might want to ask yourself, where are those folks going to end up? Where are they going to go? And I don't know. I've been seeing, there was I saw an article yesterday. This is not in the stack of stuff today, but I did read this yesterday, or at least saw it and just, did a quick little, just a little breeze of it. But in West Virginia, there's operations where they've apprehended hundreds of criminal illegal aliens. You don't hear those things on the news because That's not done in a place that is fighting the presence of ICE and that's harboring these criminal illegal aliens under their sanctuary city and state policies. But where are they going to go? I think California might want to be on notice because, listen, I think it's coming to you next. I mean, if you're not next, you're in the list. There's a lot of other places as well. So that's what we're real quick, my friends, before I play this. You've heard me talk about Freedom Marketplace. Freedom Marketplace is something we have here at the Todd Huff Show. When we started this program in 2015, we grew the show and we've had advertising partners join us. And at first I started putting their logos on our website, and that got messy really fast. And so I realized we needed an online searchable directory of businesses so people could find people that they heard advertised on this program. And in the process of doing that, I realized, you know what? We could also give other businesses who maybe don't have a need or have the budget to advertise on our show, but they can still have a listing at Freedom Marketplace. And so that's what we did. We built the directory. It's a place where businesses that are aligned with conservative values and principles, they love this country. There's not a strict litmus test, but these businesses have made a promise, a pledge not to support leftist candidates or leftist causes. This is where you can go to find businesses that are pushing in the same direction you are. It's free for you to use as a user. Check it out. Support the businesses that are actually fighting some of this nonsense and wokeness we have out there today. They're pushing in the same direction you are. FreedomMarketplace.net is where you can go. Again, FreedomMarketplace.net, liberty and business for all. Let's listen to Tom Homan here, my friends, give his account of what happened with this agreement in Minnesota and what that means for ICE and how this can actually be advantageous.
We currently have an unprecedented number of counties communicating with us now and allowing ICE to take custody of illegal aliens before they hit the streets. Unprecedented cooperation.
That's critically important.
And I'll say it again. This is efficient, requires only 1 or 2 officers to assume custody of a criminal alien target rather than 8 or 10 officers going into the community and arresting that public safety threat. This frees up more officers to arrest or remove criminal aliens.
That's right.
More officers taking custody of criminal aliens directly from the jails means less officers on the street doing criminal operations. This is smart law enforcement, not less law enforcement. It's safer for the community, safer for the officers, and safer for the alien. This coordination also makes it far more safe for the Twin Cities. Arresting a public safety threat in the safety and security of a jail is the safest thing we could do.
Makes sense to me.
Further, less public safety risks are being released back into the communities, reduces recidivism. So local law enforcement can direct their limited resources to other public safety matters in their community. This is another priority of President Trump.
Yeah, like maybe investigating Tim Walz and the Somali daycare scandal, alleged daycare scandal there in Minnesota. But hey, listen, this makes total sense, right? Now that you have the whole picture, now that we understand what's happening, it's quite obvious to me that this is not an act of capitulation. This is actually a step in the right direction that could, believe it or not, yield more success with the removal of criminal illegal aliens in Minnesota. It frees up resources, those 700 officers that are then going to be sent somewhere. I mean, they're not going to be put on administrative duties suddenly. These folks are going to be continuing the mission here and probably go to another city. So that is the explanation for what's going on. Now I want to shift gears now. This is what's happening in Minnesota. This is the explanation for ICE. ICE, of course, is under the purview of the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, and so forth, which now this leads to the discussion, which I mentioned earlier, which is the issue of DHS funding. DHS funding. So, because you've listed here, because you've studied on your own, that we had a partial government shutdown for a couple of days. No one really recognized or noticed that because it was really inconsequential. The federal government, there are 10 spending bills that have to be basically passed. Half of them had already been passed through September 30th, the end of the fiscal year, 2026. And there were 6 that weren't funded. The Senate passed 5 of the 6 all the way through, I believe, all through the fiscal year. And there was one bill that was only funded, or one spending bill that was only funded for 2 weeks. That was the spending bill that includes ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. And so the Democrats have set it up to have a fight over this. And so 11 of the 12 spending bills have been passed, and they will take us through the fiscal year September 30th. We have one of the 12 that's not been fully funded. It's only been funded for 2 weeks. And if we don't get to a resolution on this in a couple of weeks, then we could have a shutdown that pertains to things under that spending, under that part of the federal spending. And so Democrats say, we're here to negotiate now. We're going to give you our list of 10 demands. I think Schumer's the one who came out and listed these. I'm going to list these 10 demands as I'm looking at the clock here, and then we'll talk about them on the other side of the break. I'm going to go ahead and list all 10 now, and then we'll talk in more depth about these on the other side of the break. Number 1, mandatory body cameras for all ICE and Border Patrol agents. Number 2, ban on masks or face coverings during enforcement operations. Number 3, judicial warrants required for arrests and detentions. I will talk about these again after the break. Number 4, uniform federal use of force standards aligned with local police rules. Number 5, independent investigation of misconduct allegations. Number 6, expanded public reporting requirements. Number 7, restrictions on proactive or roving enforcement operations. Number 8, codified disciplinary timelines and penalties for agents. Number 9, enhanced training and certification mandates tied to funding. And number 10, congressional oversight triggers written directly into appropriations law. So, I'm going to talk about those on the other side of the break because there's a lot there. And listen, we're not going to be able to get through all of these. I will elaborate in today's newsletter, which is totally free. So there are the things I won't be able to get to today on the program. We'll talk about in the newsletter, some of those. And you can sign up for free. All you got to do is go to toddhuffshow.com and sign up for the Inner Circle. Again, it's a free daily email newsletter that you can get where we talk about what we talked about here and into some other areas and adding some depth and also giving you the links to the things we've discussed and so forth as well. So, got to take a quick time out, my friends. You're listening here to Conservative Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. We're going to go through those negotiation demands that the Democrats have placed on Republicans as they negotiate funding for the Department of Homeland Security. So, one of the biggest challenges you have as a conservative is finding ways to ensure your values align with the way that you live your life. And that includes the way that you invest your money. That's why I love what the team at 48 Financial is doing. They specialize in biblically responsible investing. That means they screen out companies that do not align with your faith and your values so that you're not funding things that go completely against what you believe in. They do all the heavy lifting. They determine research and figure out where the money in these companies is actually going, what they're supporting. All you have to do is answer some questions really quick and easily so that they can identify where your investments are, and then they'll give you a report that says, hey, here is where your money is going, and this is how those values align, your values align with what you're investing in. And then you can decide from there what you want to do. So all you have to do is go to 48financial.com/Todd to take the quick and easy assessment. 48financial.com/Todd. 48 Financial, because your money should work for your values. And certainly, my friends, not against them. Okay, so let's go through these lists of demands the Democrats have placed on funding ICE, on DHS, which ICE, of course, is a part of. So mandatory body cameras for all ICE agents and Customs and Border Patrol field agents. I mean, I don't know to what degree this isn't already the case. I would have no problem with this. I think that it's a good thing. In fact, think about what we learned after the Renee Good incident because of the officer's body cam footage. Ban masks or face coverings during enforcement operations. This one's a little bit trickier to me because there's a legitimate reason for this. Now, I do think that it needs to be abundantly clear, and maybe it is, but it needs to be abundantly clear. There needs to be identifiable ways to identify these officers, not necessarily personally, because the problem is, personally, these people literally want to kill these agents. They do. They've doxed them. They act like they dox them for purposes, and that's, by the way, doxing is publicly revealing your identity, your address, and all that sort of stuff, typically is what that means. But they publicly identify you for the sake of intimidation, right? Remember, these are the people that have been told to go and to cause a scene. If they see somebody who's having dinner or going to the grocery store or whatever, and they think they're an ICE agent, to make their lives miserable. We've been told that these people try to identify where these agents are staying and try to keep them up all night in their hotels or wherever to make sure that they just want to make their lives miserable. And some of these people believe that they are completely justified in harming these people. So I'm not a guy that likes to hide the identity of law enforcement, but when there is a legitimate threat, I understand it. Now, that being said, there also should be a clear indication, and I'm not suggesting there isn't, but just to make sure it's clear, that this person is a federal authority who's a member of ICE or Border Patrol or whatever. Judicial warrants required for arrest or detention. This is a tricky one that they're trying to sneak in there. Friends, let me tell you what's going on, and I don't have a lot of time. This might be one of the things I elaborate on in the newsletter, but judicial warrants are used when there is a criminal, when something is being pursued criminally. So when they say people who are arrested and deported are not afforded due process rights, this is all connected, because the way that the U.S. Code is written, there are two paths. You can charge people criminally for being in this country illegally, but that's typically not what happens unless they're a repeat offender or something really violent or something like that. What typically happens is they are it's treated as a civil matter, which is, hey, you're not supposed to be here. You can't demonstrate to me through your documents that you have a birth certificate, that you're from here, that you are a citizen here. You can now be deported. There is still due process for that process. It is just different than criminal due process. And so this is a little bit, again, the left lives in the shadows, my friends. They like to keep things confusing. They like to conflate things. They like to mix words together so long as they think it furthers their agenda and their cause. And this requiring a judicial warrant to arrest and detain people is crazy. as I understand what it's saying here. Again, I'm reading from a list because these are administrative warrants. They are getting warrants. They are getting warrants to do what they're doing. They are administrative warrants because they are not criminal charges that they're pursuing. They are pursuing things civilly. If you're pursuing things civilly, you don't have to have a judicial warrant. What this would do would make the entire process much more tedious. It would take much longer, and there would be much fewer deportations, I guess. Uniform federal use of standards aligned with local police rules. Listen, I've got no problem with having standards, but to tie those to local police rules in places that are run by leftist lunatics is a far cry from a reasonable step. That's all I can get to. I'm out of time. Folks, I got to go. SDG.